Hi everyone, my name is Chelsea, a Seattle-based developer and designer. In this video, we'll be covering the basics of how to get up and running with Jupyter Notebook. When you're reading documentation about Jupyter Notebook, you will see the terms kernel and server getting thrown around quite a bit. Hopefully this video will give you a better handle on what those terms mean and how they relate to the Jupyter Notebook application. In addition to being able to define terms like server and kernel, by the end of this video you should feel comfortable launching a notebook, editing a notebook, and explaining how notebooks fit into a larger picture. I encourage you to pause this video so that way you can read through these learning goals now. Before we dive into the meat of this video, I just wanted to give a big picture overview of what Jupyter Notebook is and what makes it so cool. Jupyter Notebook is a way to write and execute code, including Python, from within your browser. This environment is powerful because it allows us to not only show how we got the results that we did, but it also allows us to reproduce those results within the browser itself. For example, I have opened here a notebook from a data science book which I downloaded. We can see that we are not only viewing Markdown, which formats this explanatory text, but we are also viewing Python code as well in these cells here. This interface looks almost like a blog post, but the neat thing here is that I can actually interact with it. For example, if I tweak this line here and then execute this code cell, we can see that our output changes. Hopefully this gives you some insight into how this technology might be useful as a means for more effective communication and collaboration of complex topics or research results. You can find this data science notebook along with a huge list of other great resources here. I'll go ahead and share this page within the instructor notes for this video. I encourage you to check out some of these notebooks so that you can experience collaborative power firsthand. Now that we have some context for how this tool fits into a bigger picture, I wanted to say a few words about installation. Depending on how you have installed Python on your computer, there are several ways that we can install Jupyter. If you are in our data analysis or our data visualization intensive, then you may have installed Python using either Anaconda, or more likely you installed Python using Miniconda, which is a slimmed down version of Anaconda. If you installed Python using Anaconda, then Jupyter should have already been installed on your computer. To ensure that this is the case, we can open up a terminal, and then we can just type in Jupyter -- version. If you don't see a version number displayed when you type this command in, then you may have installed Python with Miniconda. If you followed our recommendation and installed Python with Miniconda, then you can use the Conda package manager to install Jupyter, like so. Conda install Jupyter. Now I'm not going to run this command since I already have Jupyter installed on my machine. I just wanted to show you the command that you would use to do that if you needed to. The last thing that I wanted to say about this is that it is strongly recommended that you install Jupyter using the Anaconda or the Miniconda distribution. However, Jupyter can also be installed with pip. For more information on how to install Jupyter with pip, or if you would like to learn more about the Anaconda installation process, please see the instructor notes. Once Jupyter has been installed, we're going to want to launch a notebook. I went ahead and downloaded the Customer Service Bot off-platform project from the end of Unit 2 of the Programming with Python Intensive. I encourage you to pause this video so that you can likewise download a project and try to follow along with me as I go. You'll get a lot more out of the video that way. So once we have a notebook file downloaded, we're going to want to launch it. To do this, we're first going to need to navigate into our project within our terminal. I have saved the Customer Service Bot project to my desktop, so I can go ahead and use the cd command to navigate into that folder. From within the folder, we can just type Jupyter Notebook. It may take a moment, but this should open up a Jupyter Notebook in our browser. If we look at our terminal, we see some messages about what Jupyter is doing. This message lets us know that it is actually running a server at this location. This server has an IPython kernel on it, which carries out our computations. An important thing to note here is that since this terminal is running a server, we will need to keep this window open for the duration of our notebook work. There's quite a bit of technical jargon used, so let's take a quick look at this diagram and see if we can't unpack some of it. When we launched the Jupyter Notebook command within our terminal, that created a local server on our own computer. Now in this context, a server is just a program running on our computer which provides functionality for other programs. In In this specific case, our local server is acting as a coordinator, facilitating communication between the notebook interface in the browser, the notebook file itself, and the IPython kernel. The IPython kernel is sort of like the brains of this operation. It is just a program that performs the calculations and executes the Python code that we write. So when we execute some Python cell within the notebook application, the browser sends a notebook file to our server. The server then sends the cell of code to the kernel to execute. In other words, the kernel doesn't know anything about the notebook file. It just knows that it is supposed to execute the code cell that the server sends it. As we play around in our notebook, we might want to keep an eye on our terminal. You don't need to understand all the nuances here, but just be aware that as you make changes to your notebook in the browser, this will affect what you see in the terminal. For example, our notebook files always have this extension. We can open this second solution file. And when we do that, we see some new messaging in our terminal. The terminal is just letting us know that we have a new kernel running on our server. Remember, this backend kernel is the program that will actually be doing the computationally intensive tasks that get communicated and displayed back to the browser interface that we'll be working in. Now that we have this notebook open, there are a few common snags that I want to point out. The first thing you should be aware of is that execution order of code cells matter. So unlike in a normal Python script where code gets executed from top to bottom, within a notebook we can execute cells in a non-sequential order. This can cause some funny issues. For example, if I try to execute this second code cell using the shift return key, we get a name error. That's because this first cell hasn't been executed yet. So this name variable isn't defined. To get this to work properly, I'd have to execute this cell first, input my name, and then when I press enter, I can then execute the second cell. And when I do that, we see that it prints out my name as expected. Since execution order matters and since cells can be executed non-sequentially, it's a good idea to keep an eye on these numbers to the left of each cell. These will allow you to keep track of the order in which cells are executed. If we ever find ourselves in a situation where we're getting errors which we suspect may be related to the execution order of our cells, and we don't necessarily want to spend time determining the order in which each cell executed, one solution might be to go to Kernel and select Restart and Run All. Notice the asterisk next to each cell. This lets us know that each cell is currently running. Right now, the notebook is waiting on input for our first cell, so let me just put in another name here. And now we see that we move down to the next point in the notebook which requires input, and that each cell between these two input cells has been executed successfully. It's important to realize that whenever you restart or close a kernel, you will lose whatever work had previously been stored in memory. For example, the first name I had put in, which was stored to the variable name, was lost with the restart. So now name is assigned to Jinx, not Chelsea. If I try to execute this cell again, we see that we're not given a prompt. That's because the notebook is still waiting for our input for step 11 down here. So we can't change the variable in the first cell until we either execute this cell or we interrupt it. So I'm just going to go ahead and interrupt it. Now when we go back up to this first cell, I can execute it and input a new name. Of course, the second cell is still displaying our old variable assignment, so we would have to execute this cell to see the new name print. Next, I think we should take a moment to explore this very top markdown cell. If I click on the cell, we see a blue bar to the left. This lets us know that we are in command mode. To explore the special commands available to us in command mode, we can click on this little keyboard icon in the toolbar. I actually just want to change the text within this cell, so I'm just going to press enter or double click on this cell, and this will move it into edit mode. Notice how the bar turns green and we see this little pencil icon. Now we can go ahead and modify this markdown. and then I could just press Shift-Enter to execute it. To learn more about the keystrokes we have at our disposal, we can go to Help, Keyboard Shortcuts, and this will show a complete list of all the shortcuts within each mode. I encourage everyone to explore and play around with these commands in your own notebooks. If this is your first time using Jupyter, then I would also highly recommend going through this user interface tour. For now, let's go ahead and wrap up our work here. We always want to remember to save. And now we can safely navigate back to our terminal. And to shut down our notebook server, we're going to want to hit Control-C twice, and that shuts it down. Alright everyone, that's all I have. This was just a very basic introduction to get you up and running with Jupyter. There's a lot more features to explore, and I encourage you all to check out the documentation if you want to dive deeper into some of Notebook's more advanced features. Thank you for your time, and happy coding.